Hello, I'm Daniel McCarthy, Vice President for the Collegiate Network at ISI, and also the editor of Modern Age. Joining me tonight is the great and estimable Larry Arnn, who is the president of Hillsdale College, which of course is the college which is responsible for the formation of ISI's own president, Johnny Burtka. So that by itself would be a great claim to fame. So welcome, Dr. Arnn.
Yeah, thank you. Very good to be with you.
So Hillsdale College is in a category of its own, and it has gone from strength to strength under your leadership. I was curious, though, what prospects do you see for the rest of American higher education? Can it be redeemed? Can it be restored?
Of course it can be redeemed and restored. Colleges are 2.5 millennia old. The need for them won't go away. It's very hard to fix them and it'll take a long time. The reason is, the one big sticky point is graduate degrees is what you need to teach in a college. And the graduate schools are a mess. So the quantity, like if you could pass a law that all the colleges need to be decent tomorrow, there wouldn't be anybody who knew what that meant to teach in them, or not enough people. But yeah, there's exciting things happening in K-12. My own view about what the government should do is decentralize it. There's too much control in the middle. That's especially wrong in education, because learning happens in classrooms. You should have authority and resources near them. And if you do that, there'll be, certainly K-12, there could be a revolution pretty soon. But in higher ed, there'll be a steady improvement, I think.
So you've already half anticipated my next question. So Hillsdale is rather unusual. There's Hillsdale, Grove City, a handful of others perhaps, in taking no federal funds whatsoever. And so I was curious, is there a role for the federal government, especially now that there may be a better administration coming in? Is there a role for the federal government in restoring higher education in America?
Yeah, well, there is, because first of all, the Department of Education is there and they're not likely to get rid of it. It could be a force for this decentralization that I spoke of. It should encourage states. You know, the way the federal government works is there are close to 3 million federal employees and close to 20 million state employees. And through its spending power, the federal government tells them what to do a lot. Well, what if there was encouragement to states to start charter schools and private vouchers and stuff like that? That would be very healthy. And in higher ed, you know, they're starting these centers. Some states are starting centers where they teach sanity. There's some good ones, a few, and there should be more of that.
So a couple of our founding fathers, I think, maybe Jefferson and Madison, thought about the idea of a national university sponsored by the federal government. Would that be a good idea?
No. Well, I have written about that. That's a very interesting thing. I sort of modeled a graduate school that we have at Hillsdale on that idea. And they had a curriculum for it, and you know, the beginnings of one, and they had some really neat ideas. And George Washington left his largest bequest outside his family to support that thing. And then George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and James Monroe all tried to do it, and they didn't get it done. As a matter of fact, James Madison was instructed by the chairman of a committee by the name of Mitchell, I remember, from Kentucky, that no, President Madison, you can't do this. The Constitution that you wrote does not permit it. I've always thought that was funny. But they had the idea that at the top level, there's some stuff you need to know to be a statesman in America, and we should have a place where you learn that. And that is a very good idea.
I'm interested to know about the response of Hillsdale's peers, or at least competitors, to your success. Do you find that other colleges and universities are starting to emulate what Hillsdale does, or do you see that they are more perhaps opposed to you, critical, or do they just ignore Hillsdale?
All three. We don't really have, a lot of our kids go to graduate and go to top graduate schools in Ivy League and other places, and professional schools and medical schools. And they seem friendly to them. And then colleges, it's not the custom in our world to beat each other up institutionally a lot. I may be more guilty of it than anybody. And then there are a procession of people who come through Hillsdale College saying, how do you do this? And I got a letter this morning from somebody, and they want to come and visit and talk to us. What do you do? And and the private college world is very troubled now. There are bankruptcies, and going to be more, I think. And so a lot of them are very fine people, and they're trying to figure out how to save themselves.
Do they consult with you often on how they can do that?
Yeah, it's, several times a year. We get deputations from this place or that. And we're in an athletic conference, and I helped to form it with some others. And they're all good people, private Christian colleges. And some of them are in trouble, and I have reason to talk with them regularly. And it's a tall order. A private college gets a substantial percentage of its money from the government. And the government brings rules, hundreds of pages of rules. And they require that you arrange your staff in certain ways so that you have people you're paying them, but they're really working for them. And so that's awkward. And I've never worked in that situation in my life, but I imagine it complicates the management of a place quite a bit. It changes. There are lots of colleges that get 80 or 90% of their total revenues from student tuition, room, and board. And a lot of those places, half to 70% of that actually is coming from the government. And so that means that and they're trying to make budget. And if they could just get 40 more kids, I hear that particular number comes up. We need 40 more kids, and we can balance our budget. And that means that then you're looking at the kids as a revenue stream. And it changes your relation to them, I think. And in some cases, I've seen it, where you're reluctant to flunk them out or make it difficult. And that's a terrible thing. It means that there's a misalignment here that's serious. And I think the government has a lot to do with that.
There's a striking difference between, on the one hand, these institutions that take federal money and therefore are subject to many more federal restrictions, including DEI requirements and any number of other supposedly civil rights requirements. On the one hand, you have that situation, but Hillsdale, which is a totally free institution, it does not depend on federal money, it has in fact, much better history of civil liberties and civil rights in particular. It's always been a free campus. It's always been a campus which has been colorblind. And tell us a little bit about that history.
Well, I've only had one job in a college in my life, and I took the job because I found out about that. I admire Abraham Lincoln very much. And there were several people at our college who got to know him and were important in his cause. We were an abolitionist college. The platform that Abraham Lincoln was elected president on, the first draft of it was written in a building that stands on our campus today. And we had more young men fight in the Civil War than any non-military college, excepting Yale. And, compare it to the University of Michigan, which is a little older than we are and was bigger at the time. They had under 100, and we had more than 500.
Wow.
All the boys went. And it's never been a military college. We still have a lot of military service coming out of our place. And they just loved freedom, and they loved the country, and they had an education, and they rallied to the cause. And when I learned that, and then I read the founding document of the college, which was written in 1844, and is a very beautiful document. And I thought to myself, maybe there's a way to run that kind of railroad. So
there's a prominent statue of Frederick Douglass on campus, and I know that Douglass has a connection with Hillsdale, doesn't he?
Spoke on the campus twice. First time in 1863, the second time after the war. In 1863, if he had to be careful where he went, because he was an annoyance to the Confederacy, and they had people looking for him to kidnap him and take him back into slavery. And that was a big trade in those days. And when I got to the college, I knew about that. I admire Frederick Douglass very much. And I said to the college historian, I said, we need a copy of his speech that he gave on the campus. And he says, it doesn't exist. And I said, bound to. You haven't looked hard enough. You know, I worked for Martin Gilbert doing the Churchill biography. If you haven't found it, it means you haven't looked hard enough. And about 6 months later, he showed up with it. He did find it. It's called Truth and Error. And it's about slavery. It's a lovely speech. He was a very interesting man.
So America has a birthday coming up in 2026. We will be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the War of Independence, and the American founding. You wrote a book about a dozen years ago called The Founder's Key. I'm curious what you'd like to see emphasized, especially in terms of the history and the philosophy of the American founding in these birthday celebrations 2 years from now.
Well, I think the celebration is probably going to be full-throated now because there's been a recent election. I think it would not have been before that. I think people need to read it. It's very beautiful. It is the final cause, to use that classic logical term, of the United States. It's the reason it exists. And it also describes inside itself the formal cause, which comes later, the Constitution. They lay out in the Declaration of Independence, in their criticisms of the king, what would be the main features of a proper constitution. And they are separation of powers and consent of the governed, representation. And you know, the Constitution is described in that very beautiful document. And of course, the beginning and the end of it are written in the most lovely, timeless language. It's about eternal things and the things we will do here now to serve them and our freedom.
I wanted to ask you about your own intellectual trajectory. So you're originally from Arkansas. I'm originally from Missouri myself. I'm curious, what was it like growing up in Arkansas, and what led you onto the path that has ultimately ended in, or issued in, being the president of Hillsdale College and leading Hillsdale College from strength to strength?
Well, people from Arkansas are proud of it, and they're right to be. I'm a big admirer of the current governor of Arkansas, Sarah Sanders. And she talked, I'm older than she is, but she talks to me like my mother did. I went to her office not long ago, and she said, I was wondering when you were going to show up here. Arkansas, I grew up in Pocahontas, Arkansas, and that's just idyllic. We had a river, we were on it a lot. We had hills, we climbed them. We shot rats in the city dump. So tremendous. Best hunting I ever did. And so it was like that. And then we had a grammar teacher and 2 math teachers in my school. And they were awesome. I can diagram an English sentence, and because I had to stand and do it on the board. And so that was great. I enjoyed that very much. And later I learned what learning really is. That happened in undergraduate school. I tried to get out of it, but there was a mandatory course in political thought. And it was taught by a great man who's a friend of mine today. And we read Plato's Republic. And I sort of saw for the first time what would be the most important things to know. And it changed a lot of things about me. Didn't go to law school. I almost did. Always wanted to when I was a boy. And I just thought, I have to find out more about this. And that's indirectly why you and I know each other.
You are a student of the great Harry Jaffa. And I was curious, how did you first learn about Jaffa and decide that you wanted to take his classes?
Well, this man who was my teacher in undergraduate school, his name is Jeffrey Wallen. He was a student of Professor Jaffa. And I followed him back to his office. I was actually, I was like most young men, cocky and unreasonable, and thought I knew everything. And it took about 3 weeks of him wiping the floor with me and reading a beautiful passage in Book 1 of the Republic. And I had a revelation, and I followed him back to his office and said, I need to know more about this. And he said, well, you have another semester. I said, I wonder if it'll take longer than that. And he said, it will. He said, you'll have to keep it up. And I said, I might go to graduate school. Is that where you learned this? And he said, you're going to law school. Everybody knows that. I was in some fancy ones. And I said, well, maybe. And I sort of had to talk him into it. You know, there's a thing, I understand it better now. We didn't know each other very well. We do now. And a professor might be embarrassed to send a student to his teacher, because what if the kid's useless? Mm-hmm. And so at first, I recall he was a little reluctant. He tried to get me to consider other options. Mm. And I kept saying, is this the best? And he'd say, well, yes. And I'd say, and that particular man was a very great teacher. But this one's good. And I'd say, well, I'd want to go to the best one. I was too cocky, you know. He said, well, what if you don't get in? I said, I will. And I did. And that's how all that happened. He lives in outside D.C. now. He's not a teacher anymore. And I like to say he inherited some money and went to seed, because he's a very good man, and a friend. But his calling was to be a teacher. He is a splendid teacher. And he's done some teaching for Hillsdale College. Wonderful. But, yeah. You know, those people like that, I mean, you have them too, right? ISI, that's part of what it's about. You know, do a very good job teaching some lovely things and see who perks up and notices. And so that was a benefit that came to me, and I'm grateful for it.
Did you find that it was stressful taking classes with Harry Jaffa? Could he be very forceful in class, and was it were students afraid to challenge him or question him?
No, he wasn't like that at all. He was he was a very belligerent man. He was not with the students. His way, he was an interesting man. He was, you know, he fought with all kinds of people, including many conservatives, and he was fierce in those fights. With us, what he was like was, the challenge was to get him to explain. Because one of my theories, because I was around him for, how long? 1974 until 2000, when I came to the college. And he died sometime after 2000, so I had to do with him after that. But I was around him a lot for 26 years. And the challenge, I think he was, when he became excited, when he became interested, deeply interested, and when he was dealing with the central things, he was as good a lecturer as I ever saw. He was not a systematic, organized, get through the material kind of teacher. And so you had to work him. You had to be pouncing, answer him questions. And sometimes he wouldn't answer. And if you kept at it, you would get your answer. I rode a bicycle probably 20,000 miles, because he was a bicycle racer. And so I thought, I'm going to learn everything this guy's got to teach. So I took it up, and I rode bicycles for a long time. I raced them a little. I was just like I was a high school athlete. I was good enough to do it, loved to do it, not good enough to really do it. And so yeah, he was, and you know, I remember a class one time. This would happen several times. Something would come, like he liked liberal students to attack him. And he was very good at that. And he was gentle with them, but he was profound. And so once he got going, and the class was supposed to be over at 4:30, and it was over at 6, and nobody noticed. And it came out and it was dark. And he explained what it is that a human being can do that a dog cannot. And it's, I can give that explanation today, but I heard him do it more than once. But that was one of his best things. And like he's, as you know, masterful teachers. The fundamentals are so well known to them that they can apply them and simplify them. And that's magical when you get to hear that. And great teachers, we have several at Hillsdale, we have many at Hillsdale College who can do that. And the kids follow them around like puppy dogs, hoping they'll say something. And so Professor Jaffa was like that.
You also worked very closely with Sir Martin Gilbert and completed the Churchill biography and worked on the documents, including 6 volumes of them, if I recall correctly. I'm curious, what lessons do you think today's leaders, and perhaps in particular the newly elected president, should take from the example of Winston Churchill?
He's Donald Trump has the root of the matter in him as regards Churchill. What I would say to anybody is, if you want to cultivate prudence, Aristotle says you can learn that best from the people who have the reputation for it. And then he names Pericles as the best example. You should read Winston Churchill. He wrote over 40 books. He wrote 8,000 pages of speeches himself, over 1,000 published articles. And they're riveting, and they are a reservoir of political wisdom. The big things in Churchill's life is tragic as well as glorious, as all political lives are, by the way. When he was a young man, he set out to prevent socialism and big wars. And it was his fate to be unable. He did try to prevent both world wars. It was his fate to lead effectively and to disastrous diminishment of his country, just better than being beat by the Nazis. And then socialism followed. But he warned about it in beautiful language all the time. And that's one thing Republican statesmen who like Winston Churchill don't understand that thing about caution about war. And Donald Trump does. Also, a big thing with Churchill was he thought the British people were the right ones, because they had it right, to decide the fate of the nation. And he thought they'd probably do a better job than anybody else. And so he was an explainer. Sometimes politicians, I think of 2 recent presidents, they become imperative with the American people. They wag their finger and tell you how it's going to be and how you ought to be, right? Churchill was not given to that. It's generous to explain, to put the argument together so that people can follow it, right? And that's an art that's, first of all, it's not easy, but Churchill cultivated that art. He worked at it, and he got into a place where he was the one to lead in the worst crisis in British history, and he got him through it. And that's because of his nature and his character and the way he built it.
So in addition to leading Hillsdale College, you also teach. And I'm curious, when you're teaching Aristotle, for example, are you making new discoveries each time you do so? Or are you finding new angles on the old material?
A classroom, nothing in education, by the way, is something that one person does to somebody else. It won't work. What you know is irrelevant unless they are focused with their whole being on the thing. And we're blessed at Hillsdale College. The kids are smart and very dutiful. It's hard to get in. You got to sign the honor code. And so now you're with a bunch of fellow human beings reading this thing with attention. And what everybody says is meaningful, even if it's wrong. And you never, I never teach anything that I don't see it afresh and better. And sometimes significant points. It's been revealed to me. I can remember 400 years ago, Professor Jaffa, I was learning Greek, which I've mostly forgotten now to my chagrin, but I knew it a bit. And there's a word in Greek, chray, and he translated the word as good. And I said, doesn't that mean necessary? It's just a vocabulary thing, right? He said, oh, that's a brilliant insight. Now, I didn't know why it was at the time, but I thought about it a long time, and I see the good is also the necessary. And so, yeah, things like that happen in, I teach all afternoon Mondays, makeup classes on Friday, because I have to do it in one sitting because I have this job. And the time flies. And if they yawn, I don't like it. And I give them coffee and cookies, or else I throw something at them. But they seldom do. And it's because it's exciting. It's fun.
Do the students change over time? Do you find that Generation Z is different from earlier generations? Or is there a kind of human nature that comes through in all students that is always present?
The latter, very much. We notice little differences. But any successful class is an achievement of everyone in it. And so when you produce that with them, it's always the same. They think. I once made a mistake. We have a Constitution course, and we read some John Calhoun. And on my syllabus, I made a mistake. And I assigned the entire disquisition on government to them. That was really stupid. And darned if they didn't read it. And I figured that out. And I apologized to them, and I said, okay, we're going to spend a week on this. And in the course of that week, this particular classroom has 4, going around the room, boards to write on. And we filled up all the boards with an account of John C. Calhoun and the disquisition on government. And when we did it, and we all took grades, and everybody helped. What does this mean? What does that mean? Is this important? Is that important? And at the end, we took grades. It gained momentum. And I don't even like John C. Calhoun, by the way, although I think he's formidable and interesting. And I remember when the class ended on a Friday. So we had equivalent of 2 weeks, right? Because I teach whole weeks in one sitting. And I did an extra class on a Friday. And we had it all up there. And we sat in silence for a minute. I said, okay, have we got that? And 3 or 4 of them said, that's really good. See, we did that together. And it starts with a mistake by me. It's good for me to do it too, because I read that book with better attention than I ever had. Calhoun writes, paraphrase, it would be impious to think that God would give us the gift of natural science and permit us to use it for ill. Now, I think that's a misunderstanding of God and the universe. And I discovered that sentence and saw its importance because we went through all that.
Wonderful. So I know you have a long background with ISI. I think you were a Richard Weaver Fellow. What does ISI mean to you, especially today in the 21st century? What can it do for people?
ISI is, of course, run by my kid, Johnny, and he's doing a good job. And it's a splendid idea, and it helped me go to graduate school. I serve on its board. I'm too busy to serve on boards, so I serve on the ones where I have to, and this is one of them. And first Chris Long and then Thomas Lynch, who's now the chairman of the board, they both said to me, you have to do this. We gave you money in graduate school, so I'm conscripted. But I find it rewarding, and one of its ideas is, because see, I very much believe this, by the way. You can't teach everybody everything, and you can't teach everybody to the same depth. But if you find the right people and help them learn, because you don't really teach them either, they learn, you help them, then they will reach many people. And so that's the idea behind ISI, and it's a good idea.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Arnn. I very much enjoyed this.